Welcome everybody to the ECR Western Balkans Summit, a hybrid conference bringing together recognized experts in the field of security, economy, democratization and European integration, as well as current and former decision makers from the Western Balkans and several MEPs from the ECR Group. Thank you for being with us for the second day. Today, in our second panel discussion, we will focus on the EU enlargement process as an opportunity to counter the challenges in the Western Balkans. I'm Milena Milutinova, host of Brussels One TV show on Bulgaria On Air TV, and I will moderate this event. Now let me introduce the two speakers of our introductory debate. The special guest Professor Tanja Miščević, Deputy Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council and former head of negotiating team for the accession of the Republic of Serbia to the European Union from 2013 to 2019. We have a video connection with her. And Professor Zdzislav Krasnodelski in the studio. Welcome, Professor. Chair of the ECR Working Group on Institutional Reform and ECR Shadow Rapporteur on Serbia and Montenegro. Ms. Miščević, first to you. The Regional Cooperation Council is a body that acts in the whole Southeast Europe, including in the Western Balkans. What is, in your view, the biggest challenge in the region? What is the biggest challenge that the region needs to tackle now?
First of all, good morning to all of you in studio and all of others that are following us. And thank you very much, Professor Krasnodębski, for inviting us, RCC, to participate in today's discussion. So actually, the region does not differ specifically now in terms of the war in Ukraine and the results of new geostrategic developments. We do feel the problem with the oil prices, which of course have the repercussion on the issue of the prices in general and tempo of inflation in the region. Although usually people think that we are, as the region, heavily dependent on export-import from Russia, that's not the case. 3 to 5% of our export goes there, but on the other hand, we are highly dependent of the oil supply coming from Russian Federation. So not only those bread and butter issues, but the spread of insecurity, uncertainty is something which is worrisome for the region, which, let me remind you all, 62% of people living in the Western Balkans, more or less around 20 million people, are pro-EU membership. As they say, they see EU membership of their respective countries' economies as the response or answer to their development, their personal development, and their values. But on the other hand, it's also an opportunity to speed up the regional initiatives, to speed up the work of our joint work on establishing common regional market, on establishing and implement the green agenda for the Western Balkans, which of course is mirroring the Green Deal for the European Union, which means until 2050 Europe carbon free, to introduce European standards in many of the areas, to boost the trade between the EU market with the common regional market, to make a market in the region which is EU market alike, which means 4 freedoms among ourselves, and to go further in terms of better cooperating with the European Union. For instance, I'm sure that you know Western Balkan is a roaming-free area. So if I am in Sarajevo or if I am in Belgrade and Tirana, it doesn't mean anything for my for the price that I'm going to pay for my telephone bill. It's actually the same. So to enlarge that with the European Union next is extremely important thing. So let me finish with one sentence. Equally to the challenges, there are a lot of potentials that the Western Balkan, particularly now in new environment, new geostrategic and geopolitical environment, could prove why this is the only area or only region that is still on the very continent of Europe, needed and promised to be part of the European Union.
Ms. Mishchevich, one additional question, if you allow me. You just mentioned the Russian influence in the field of economy. What about the Russian influence in Serbia in the political field, in the field of policy?
Well, it is something that we are all afraid of. So one of the perils, and then it's not only an issue of one of the Western Balkan states, but for all is also a challenge, is that this geostrategic development not spread or go into the Western Balkan to become the security challenge for the European Union and for all of us. And that's why it's extremely important that all Western Balkan states are following the EU opinion, decision and standing point, or to vote or to align with the decisions with the European Union, securing to be the joint strategic answer as only unified. And that is also one of the important things that Western Balkan unify with the EU standing point in this respect is one of the protection of not being under heavy political influence coming from Russia.
Professor Krasnodębski, can you compare the current obstacles in the EU integration process of the Western Balkan countries with the accession negotiations of Poland and other Central European countries?
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is also not very easy, this we joined the European Union in 2004, and we know that the decline of communists were at 89, but there was a different context, I think. Yeah, first of all, we know all this was Europe was united under impact of Solidarność movement and all the resistance against communists. There was a decline of communism as a totalitarian ideology. We thought that the West was considered very united, and this time is victor this is a victory of the Western civilization. We all read, and that's Francis Fukuyama, about the end of the history, and it was very peaceful process. And then, with exception of Romania and Balkan war. And now we are in the situation in which, in war, in Europe, on the in the EU border, first of all, we have also some weakness, I think, division in the West. ECR Group is very sometimes critical. We support, of course, the European integration, and we support the idea of enlargement of the EU. On the other hand, we see also the reluctance and mistake made in the policy. If Professor Mishchevich are talking about dependence of Serbia on Russia, we have the same in Europe, in the heart of Europe, in Germany, in France. You ask about political influence on Russia. So if we criticize Serbia and other Western Balkan states, we shouldn't forget the influence of Russia everywhere in Europe. And I think we move also more and more to the too much centralized and project of the EU, what we discussed also in the Conference of Future of Europe. So this is probably, we have, I think this war, and I think the heroism of Ukraine is a challenge for us to rethink also our policy and to be much more open and much more sympathetic to the countries who strive for Europe. But then we have also rethink what Europe is. And Europe, as we always stress, is not the same as the European Union, especially in the current state.
Thank you, Professor. Ms. Mishchevich, has the Russian aggression on Ukraine changed anything in the EU enlargement process in the Western Balkans from the perspective of those countries, and especially if we talk about Serbia?
Well, I cannot concentrate on one of the Western Balkan countries. I would like really to share with you the collective developments in the region. And as Professor Krasnodebski well noticed, it's the time to rethink the enlargement policy, but also to rethink how what Europe we would like to have. In that respect, I think that the Western Balkan is also needed for this type of thinking. Let me remind you, 2 years ago, the new negotiation methodology, which is a completely new approach to the negotiations for the membership of the countries of the Western Balkan has been adopted. And there is a room to rethink and to introduce more merit-based, more strict conditionality, but also to include much more Western Balkan candidate countries into the processes in the going on in the European Union. Like there is, I'm sure that Professor knows, and also the others participating, the phase into sectorial policies, which has been introduced as one of the potentials, which means when discussing about the development of let's take as an example the common foreign security policy in the European Union, why not also having on board the Western Balkans and discuss in this type of area. As an organization of 6 Western Balkan states, we are, or economies, we are not part of the debate on future of Europe, but the platform has been open for individual participation, for the civil society organization, which is extremely important. It is also open for us, regional integration and organization, to share the idea. So the voice of the Western Balkan can be heard, but it's also important to understand and to share the developments from the Western Balkan to all 27 member states equally, with all members of the European Parliament, what we are doing, what are the newest development, where are we in terms of overcoming some of the mutual internal Western Balkan problems. So we are standing, I'm talking now and speaking now on behalf of the RCC, free for whenever this type of exchange and more information from the Western Balkan is needed.
Ms. Mishchevich, if the 6 Western Balkan countries join the EU sanctions on Russia, would it increase their chances for the European Union, and would it speed up the process of negotiation?
There is an obligation for all candidate countries, and even with the signing the Stabilization and Association Agreement, to progressively align with the decisions which are taken by the Common Foreign Security and European Security and Defense Policy. It is the obligation which should be reached 100% until the very moment of the membership. Well, we know all that there are some of them that are not able, willing, not possible, according to their explanation, to introduce the very sanctions, but it does not mean that not all six of Western Balkan economies join to the very clear judgment joining the European Union member states on saying very harsh words towards the aggression and war, asking and supporting the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So in that respect, there are no question marks. Yes, direct answer to your question. If all join completely to all the foreign policy decisions of the European Union, it will help. But not only that, the participation in EU-led missions or activities in that respect, humanitarian, or whatever type is needed, will also support the argument of sharing the values.
In your view, what are the chances for Serbia to join the sanctions?
Well, I cannot speak on behalf of Serbia for sure, of the Serbian government now, but following, of course, what is going on in that respect, the percentage of alignment has becoming bigger. It's not 100%, as we were stated from Serbia several times. Serbia could not introduce sanctions because of the general position of Serbia toward, and the citizenship of Serbia towards the repercussion, or having in mind the own experience being under sanctions.
Professor Krasnodębski, what's your comment on what Ms. Miščević have just said?
I agree with almost all what was said. As a first of all, I think it is very important and to include Western Balkan states in many, our regional cooperation and different format we have. For instance, we proposed, there was a proposal of ECR Group and my personally to include Western Balkan states in the Conference of Future of Europe, representative also civil society. Unfortunately, it was not accepted by our partner. We have many also regional initiatives which were very important, in which there is inclusion also of EU states and non-EU states. So just to mention some organized by my country, 3C initiative, so-called Lublin Triangle. This is Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine, and we work very, very close together. Or the Europe of Carpathia. And so let's allow to be participate the representative political but also social partners and representative of civil society in our work in Europe. This is, I think, the best way, and to make a progress on this integration and also to combat the influence of Russia and China. And talking about Russia and the influence of Russia in Balkan, we have to also to ask us the honest the question and trying to answer this honest, why Russia was attractive for some countries, also some political forces in Europe. And this is because, of course, of the disinformation and propaganda, but also of our weakness, probably. So I would say a little self-criticism would be also very helpful, and we should not forget that the aim should be to enlarge the European Union as quickly as possible, and this is concerning Western Balkans, but also what we discussed previously, the opening also this possibility for Ukraine in future, Moldavia, but also Georgia.
Has the war in Ukraine changed the EU perspective for all those countries, Western Balkan countries and Eastern Partnership ones?
I think so, and that is not only because we are now more conscious that how big threat is Russia and neo-imperial tendencies. But on the other hand, also Ukrainians showed us how strong is this attachment to the values like freedom, like democracy, and so on, and of course peace. So today Ukraine is defend Europe, and I think it is a good opportunity to show, because we are talking here about our conference, that it is also a choice of civilization. Yeah. Civilization in which the individual freedom is a value, in which also national sovereignty is value, and democracy is value, with civilization in which not only the time of communists showed this, in which these values are not respected. I am talking now about Russia, and there is a continuation from the Tsarist Russia through Soviet Union till the Russia of Putin. There are really different I would say choices for us, and I hope that now the people in Western Balkan also are much more aware that it is a fundamental differences, notwithstanding all mistake and all weakness also of the West, of the Europe, of the European Union. But there are mistakes and weakness we can always correct, because we have a free discussion, free media, I hope still, and we have a democracy in which the different political position can compete.
Ms. Miščević, you just mentioned that the 6 countries from the Western Balkans are trying to align their economies, their in the field of politics with the requirements of the European Commission. Should they try to do their best to align with the recommendations and the requirements of the European Parliament? For instance, the European Parliament requires in its annual reports year after year for Serbia as well as North Macedonia to open their communist archives, and this is not still not happening. What is your comment on that?
It's not happening, you are right, but it's not taken into the consideration. The opinion, the recommendation is stemming from the European Parliament resolution on particular of the Western Balkan 6 are, believe me, read very thoroughly in all the region by all media. Also, they are interpreted differently, and that is one of the very important issues. But all of the Western Balkan countries' economies are actually following the agenda of aligning with the obligation is stemming from both the implementation of the Stabilization and Association Agreement, as well as of the reports, annual country progress reports, whatever you would like to call that documents. On the basis of those documents, of course, the European Parliament is working on its own resolution. So yes, they are part of alignment, but those are the very difficult issues. It's a little bit different situation than it used to be. That we differs from the countries of the Central Eastern Europe, and the debate inside the society is not so strong and not so univocal when it comes to the opening the secret archives of our previous state, as we, a part of Albania, are sharing the same previous state. And if you allow me just one sentence vocal to actually what the professor said. The communication is extremely important to fight with the false news. We only recently managed to have the majority of people in some parts of the Western Balkans seeing EU as a major donor for our recovery, building and development, not Russia and China. So communicating with the people, especially communication coming from the members of the European Parliament, will be extremely important.
Professor, your comment on that?
Yes, these questions of the dealing with the past, with totalitarian past, I think it's a very, very important. But on the other
Aren't
hand,
we supposed to read the past in order to see
yes,
the future?
Yes,
because if these countries, if they open their secret services archives, many ties, including the ties between Russia and Belgrade, for instance, will become will emerge and will be public for the people.
Yes, it's very important. I just have to mention that, of course, you know, it was always very difficult also in our countries. I remember, you know, I was always for illustration in Poland, opening of an archive. But I remember, you know, in the even 10 years ago, how there was a big resistance against this. And there's some colleagues some politicians who were against are today members of the European Parliament. We should forget that it is not very, very easy, but it is necessary to do.
All the Central European countries did it.
It was a big victory, you know, that we compelled. This is not a secret that there are many former communists also in the parliament, and I could also say about some from my country who were against opening the archive and you know, showing all these ties. But we overcome this, and this is I can say we can also to say our friends in the Western Balkan. It is necessary. It is not easy, but we can overcome these obstacles, and it would be for advantage for societies, yeah, in Western Balkans, as it was from Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Bulgaria, and so on.
All of us, we have opened our archives.
It is totally agree. It is necessary in order to build up really stable, democratic and transparent society.
Do the politicians in Serbia see it the same way, Ms. Miščević?
As I told you, all around the Western Balkan, there are discussions about that. Since the beginning of the political changes, not only in Serbia, but also in other parts of the Western Balkan. But again, I'm not sure that the situation is completely the same as it used to be in Central Eastern Europe during the period of communism. I'm not also going to say it was not similar, but that is one of the issues that is not on top of agenda of the public discourse in the Western Balkan. It pop up from time to time. But not in that respect so heavily. For us, I have to admit, and I am sure that people coming from the Western Balkan, the biggest issue are the reading of the 90s. We are still fighting to overcome that past, which is the imminent result for problems and political issues that are not solved in the region that I am belonging to.
Hopefully the time for opening these archives of the communist regime will come soon. Your last comments, Mr. Krasnodiebski?
As I see that, as I said already, that there is a chance now for new opening, because on both sides. In the EU, we probably have to start some kind of self-assessment of our policies, but also I think in the Western Balkans. And Ukraine has shown us Ukraine was very underestimated also by the West. You know, the strength of resistance. You know all the progress Ukrainians made in the recent years. The same is about Georgia. We are all not perfect, and we shouldn't demand perfection, but we should engage in the dialogue, for instance, about what we said now about archive, about assessment of the past, dealing with the past, and I think it will change Europe once again, and this hopefully when we are talking here in a couple of years later, then Western Balkans and also the states of the Eastern Partnership will be already the member of the EU.
Professor, Ms. Miščević, what is your last comment? What is the biggest challenge for the 6 Western Balkan countries in their process of EU integration?
To stay as one important focus, as part of one important focus of the European Union, not only as the part of the enlargement policy, but as I think it was the President of the European Commission that said only recently, as intrinsically part of the European Union, of the European continent, as somebody who can bring the benefits, not only to be the challenge for both European policy and the politics and the European institution. To even speed up, as Professor said, your EU thinking about the enlargement policy and the potentials of that policy brought during the past to the European Union, but also what it can bring in the future.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
For me, I think very important also from the Western Balkans is reconciliation between nations and to acceptance, the diversity of the experiences. This is very difficult because, of course, Western Balkan, all the states are result of the not successful union, Yugoslavia, yeah, and we know all this weakness and crimes and so on. But now is a time for to accept each other in a different religious, cultural, and historical condition of the developing of national consciousness. So I think it's more friendship in the Western Balkans between nations. It is what we need. It is not easy. It is not easy also in Europe and among, but yeah, we need to accept each other as a European in our different national identities.
Good neighborhood is one of the criteria, one of the political criteria for EU accession. Should these countries, are they supposed to solve their problems with their neighbors before starting the process of negotiations?
You see, some problems are normal. There's always some problems between neighbors. We know, but I think if it is based on the goodwill, yeah, acceptance also of the status quo, and I think the national identities, and also acceptance that the peace and territorial integrity, as was mentioned by Professor, is very important. And I am think that we could be optimistic. At what is European Union? European Union is also the way we solve our differences in institutional way, in negotiation, sometimes even tough negotiation, because there should be and there will be the differences between us. I think we should not think about the European Union as a utopia, you know, or totally harmonious and some paradise. It is a human organization with all weakness of our human being, but you know, it's a way in which we can successfully solve our problems, and many times for mutual advantages.
Professor Krasnodebski, Ms. Miščević, many thanks to both of you for your interesting contributions to this debate. In a minute, we are coming back. Stay with us for the expert discussion that will follow just after the short video. We are back to the ECR Western Balkans Summit, a hybrid conference on the Western Balkans European integration perspective. Our next guests are the ECR MEP, Mr. Ladislav Ilčić, member of the European Parliament delegation for relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. Welcome to our studio.
Yeah, thank you.
And Ms. Asita Kanko, member of the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee and the ECR Shadow Rapporteur on Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we have remotely Dr. Anton Pančev, Assistant Professor at the Department of Balkan Studies, Sofia St. Clement Ohridski University. Mr. Haki Abazi, member of the Parliament from Kosovo, Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and Diaspora, and Mr. Georgi Vrnu, Program Director, Institute for Mediation and Democracy from Albania. Let me now start with Dr. Anton Pančev. Dr. Pančev, are you with us?
Yes, it's
good morning.
For me. Thank you for the invitation.
Bulgaria has been a member of the European Union for more than 10 years now. In few words, how did the EU accession change the country, and how has the European Union membership been a successful remedy to the systematic problems that the country had?
Yes, thank you for the question. Look, after the falling of the communist regimes before 33 years, the integration of the post-communist countries on the Balkans in the EU was naturally perceived as the only reasonable way to prosperity. But in the same time, in Bulgaria, the Euroscepticism is also very popular for a variety of reasons. I want to talk about these reasons. Bulgaria, yes, it's true, Bulgaria receives many funds from EU thanks to the cohesion policy. But for example, Bulgarian farmers receive less money than their colleagues from other countries and are less competitive in the common market. In the same time, the banking system, the public utilities, etc., are under the control of Western companies, Western banks, and which gain big profit due to the monopoly in these crucial sectors of the Bulgarian economy. But Bulgaria was not accepted to join the Schengen area now maybe 11 years, although the criteria were satisfied according to European experts. Bulgaria wants to enter the Eurozone and it's obliged to fulfill the so-called convergence criteria. These economic and legal conditions are required from Sofia, and the argument for the refusal of entrance is that in the future new criteria are to be more actual. We can see that the Bulgarian membership in the EU, together with many positive aspects, results in obvious clashes with the mainstream EU politics. especially with reference to the cultural area. The present concept of multiculturalism, which is promoted as an official policy of the EU, guarantees the full domination of the Western culture over the rest of the EU countries and can lead to gradual extinction of the smaller cultures, more helpless in terms of number of representatives and because of their insufficiency of resources for maintaining their own cultural, historical, and traditional values. I think that the leaders of the countries from the Western Europe proclaimed as an official goal of the EU to create a multicultural society. But if we analyze the facts regarding this claim, the recent influences of the Western culture are threatening entirely to dominate the Balkans. As example, I want to give the attacks on the Bulgarian historical roots and culture, which are happening very often after the open face of the North Macedonian claims towards the Bulgarian historical and cultural heritage. The Bulgarian demands in the negotiation process very often are characterized as backward, as primitive. Every week we can see many articles in Western magazines, journals, which says this openly or handles the issue with underlying similar assumptions. Such kind of attacks are more and more present and provoke a further alienation among the Bulgarians from the European project, not only because these statements are primitive and not scientific, but also because an obvious hypocrisy sees the light of day, given the fact that namely the Western politicians and cultural activists talk very much about multiculturalism. My conclusion is that we have got many advantages from our EU membership, of course, but there are some critical areas of trust that undermine the European idea in the Bulgarian society. Thank you.
Dr. Panchev, one additional question, because you just mentioned the controversy between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. In your view, should a country candidate for the European Union comply with all the Copenhagen criteria required for the accession, especially when we talk about human rights and human rights respect?
Yes, we know that the political criteria for the enlargement process, stability of institutions, guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for and protection of minorities. Every country which apply to join EU have to respect the human rights of their minority groups, to stop the hate speech against other countries and peoples, to protect the cultural heritage and historical monuments, to deny the totalitarian regimes, etc. These countries which really want to join the EU must respect the main principles, the basis of the EU values. Thank you.
Do they understand this rule?
Yes, but I think that every kind of compromise with the main values, with the principles of EU will jeopardize the EU future, not only in the region, but they will undermine the EU future of the EU project.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panchev. Now, let me tell you that with us already is Miss Asita Kanko, member of the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs and ECR Shadow Rapporteur on Bosnia and Herzegovina. Welcome in the studio, Ms. Kanko. Now, to you, Mr. Ilčić, Mr. Ladislav Ilčić, member of the European Parliament Delegation for Relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. But first of all, Mr. Ilčić, what about your country, Croatia? How does the European Union negotiation process affected your country. This was the last country that joined the European Union so far.
So Croatia had the most difficult and the longest negotiation process of all countries. It was really difficult. And but what is the most important, that we really had European perspective. So we really wanted to enter European Union. We were more than aware that the different global players, so to say, like Russia and their good relation to Serbia, and of course Turkey and Saudi Arabia, who have stronger and stronger influence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, make our choice, so to say, more easy. So that was actually the only way, the only perspective for development of Croatia. So anyway, I have to underline also this, that there were some lobbies from European Union. We wanted to use this position of Croatia, so to say, addicted to European Union, that they wanted to impose some criteria which were not obligatory, you know, and they presented this criteria as obligatory. So mostly left-wing parties from European Union wanted to impose some moral and ethical issues on Croatia, like these are requirements for entering European Union, and these requirements were not there. You know, so it is not an easy process when a state should make difference between real requirements, which are really requirements for entering European Union, and which are not. So, and also, you know, what is important from European Union is to give this perspective. You know, because if you don't have this perspective, and if you don't really believe that you can become a member of European Union, then it is even harder, more difficult to be persistent on this path. And that is what is going on with these 6 countries, which from some lobbies in the European Parliament want to be put in a package deal, what is not good, because then if you make some kind of development as a country and your neighbor doesn't, then you depend on the other one.
So and one by one is the best way, right?
What?
In your view, one by one,
yes,
is the
we
best
must
way
have individual approach. That is very important, that is crucial, because there are different players. I mentioned, for example, relation Russia and Serbia. You know, there were, for example, protests of support, gatherings of supports in Serbia for Putin. Mm-hmm. And his aggression, and that is what we.
It was the only European country that has had this such kind of demonstration.
Yeah, and they didn't want to join the sanctions, or just partially, and so we have to consider this relation, because this, you know, we cannot, so to say, sit on 2 chairs. So Serbia has to make decision. Either they want to go to European Union and accept the values and approaches of European Union, or their relation to Russia is more important for them. So that is very important, because this relation could influence on other countries, you know, stability. For example, for Putin, it would be very interesting to move focus from Ukraine to some other parts of the world, or like, for example,
like
Western Balkans, like, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina. You know, and Serbia, we cannot forget that they made the same aggression 30 years ago, first to Slovenia, then to Croatia, then to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and all other countries. So in their experience, this approach is not something what is not good for them. So they are used to this approach, and it is really dangerous, because if with support of Putin they move this way of approach, like aggression, to different parts of the world, so that could make a really situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is anyhow very complicated, especially concerning the
especially Republika
elections we have
Srpska,
in
which
October.
has close ties with also with Belgrade and Moscow.
Yeah, yeah, and we have to know historically, Bosnia and Herzegovina is multi-ethnic state. We have to consider this fact. Of course, in European Parliament, there are Greens and Socialists and some other groups who would like to erase our nations from the map of Europe. You know, just like in European Union, we all would be just citizens, you know. And this civil approach now goes in line with Bosniaks, with Muslims' interest in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because there are the largest number of them there. You know, and always this Unitarian approach is the best for the people who are the biggest number of them. So it was the same in Yugoslavia. Serbs were for this unitaristic approach. So they say we are all brothers and sisters and things like this. And at the end, when it comes to who will have the power, Serbs had the power. So now it's the same thing with Bosniaks in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And now we have the problems. It's not just Serb nationalism what is a really big and a huge problem, and as I said, with connection to Russia, a very dangerous problem. But we now have the problems of this unitarism, you know, in which for 20 years European Union has this policy. So European Union, with their high commissioners and everything, would like to impose this approach that there is no more Serbs, Croats and Bosniaks there, but they're all Bosnians and Herzegovinans. But 20 years after this, having this policy there, so we had a census there. And people could say, I'm a Bosnians or I'm Herzegovinians. And just 1.5% of people have chosen to say that they're Bosnian and Herzegovinians. And so I would say that European policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina is 1.5% realistic and 89.5% unrealistic, because they don't consider the fact that Bosnia and Herzegovina is multi-ethnic state, like, for example, Switzerland or I would say Belgium. You know, we have some proud Flemish people or proud Wallonians, and that is good. That is not bad, you know. It doesn't, in the same time, it doesn't mean that they hate each other or they cannot make some relations. But we must have just a relation among people, you know, among peoples, among Bosnians, and we have to consider also the fact that Dayton Agreement ended the war, so it's not a joke. And Dayton Agreement is based on this relation among nations, among Serbs, Muslims, Croats there. And we have to keep this. So it's not that we want to make some differences among people. There are differences. There are different nationalities, which doesn't mean that they cannot live together. They can. And we can put more and more civil rights on this. But as a fundament, we must have this just relation among
Before going to Ms. Kanko, last question. You were talking about packages. What about the package with Macedonia and Albania, North Macedonia and Albania? They're going in one and the same package, but their level of readiness is different.
Yeah.
Should they be divided in their negotiation process?
We have to respect very precisely every move they make. And also, it's not just about them. For example, I will mention also Kosovo, which has very, very difficult situation because their relation to Serbia. And now, you know, like European Union is saying, oh, dear Kosovo, go there and make some agreements with Serbs. Oh, they will make they will make never agreement with Serbs. And it doesn't mean that we have to put Kosovo aside. You know, we still have visas for a regime for Kosovars. It's not fair. You know, we have to look at Kosovo as a state, and we have to appreciate every move they make. And the same is with North Macedonia, the same with Albania. We have to be very careful and very precisely watching what they are doing, and to appreciate and to reward any move, every positive move they make.
Ms. Kanko, going to you. what is the biggest challenge for Bosnia and Herzegovina in the accession process?
I think to understand what the biggest challenge of Bosnia and Herzegovina is, it's good to look at the Balkans as as a whole, and also look at the conditions and the way in which countries can join the European Union. As ECR Group, of course, we support the accession of the Balkan countries to the European Union, but not at all costs. You know, just like a marriage. I would expect people to be in love first and have some certain agreements. It's the same also like to join the European Union. You need to make some agreements. We have the topic here, Europe as a civilisational choice. It comes with so many values, with so many opportunities and challenges that you need to adopt. So from the Balkan countries, and for any country who want to join the European Union, of course, you need to comply to the Copenhagen criteria, and you need to perform the necessary reforms. You also need to realize that joining the European Union is not going to be a miracle that will solve all the problems and hardship that you have. What is going to solve them is the journey, is the process of joining the Union, because you will have to comply to the rules, to the values, and that means that you need to perform some necessary reforms. If those reforms are performed, then a country can join the Union. So in fact, it depends on the country itself. If you perform these reforms very fast and correctly, then you will join the Union faster. If you take them very, very slow, then it will take time. So today, as a shadow rapporteur on Bosnia-Herzegovina, what I've noticed is that there are still 17 key issues regarding Bosnia-Herzegovina, and they need to perform the reforms, and only few steps have been taken. I noticed that there are very good intentions, but in reality, there need to be the application of these intentions in the reality. We see that the situation still needs to be de-escalated in the country as well. And we see that regarding fundamental rights, regarding the fight against corruption and organized crime, and regarding the judiciary, for example, there are still a lot of challenges. But we are in a good dialogue. What I really hope that the EU would do is to speak respectfully and with open heart with Bosnia-Herzegovina, because just like my colleague here said, every country inside the EU has its own identity and its internal realities. Now we have common values that we share, but indeed inside Bosnia-Herzegovina, there are different identities that need to move together, and we need to take all of them into account.
If I can add just one more sentence, I completely agree. And for example, in the European Parliament, we have, for example, for Malta, I think they have 6 members. You know, and when we would do it proportionally, then, for example, Germany should have 1,000 MEPs. So we also in European Parliament think about having some kind of proportion about a good relation among different states. So we cannot say that we are just citizens and that every citizens, you know, just to see the citizens' rights. So we have to see also this position of nations.
Now we go to our video connections with Kosovo and Albania, where we have Mr. Haki Abazi, member of Parliament from Kosovo, chairman of its Committee on Foreign Affairs and Diaspora, and as well as Mr. Georgi Vrno, Program Director, Institute for Mediation and Democracy from Albania. Mr. Abazi, your country went through very tumultuous times at the end of the previous century. There are still many countries, including in the EU, that don't recognize the independence of Kosovo. More than 20 years after the war, what does the European Union represent to Kosovo, and what are the hopes or fears that your people associate with it?
Hi, and perhaps still good morning to everyone there, and thank you for this opportunity. The question is both one that we try to keep it up in front of us all the time, but there is no other choice, and we have proved that in several phases of this, let's say, period of freedom since 1999 and then in the post-independence. For Kosovo, European Union is a family that we belong, a geography that we belong, a culture that we belong, and a political union, an economic union that we want to join. And perhaps the Kosovar people are on the absolute majority in favor of the European Union. And this is not just part of a discussion where we think that the problems of Kosovo will disappear once we are part of the European Union. It is truly a value and demonstrated in, as I said, in several occasions in the phase. For example, Kosovo did not accept, in the middle of pandemics of the COVID-19, was the country that refused to get Russian and Chinese vaccines in order to be basically following all the rules and procedures and recommendations of the European Union. Kosovo passed the resolution on Ukraine situation and the Russian aggression, immediately joining the European Union countries on aligning the foreign policy and putting the sanctions for Russia. We have asked, although we don't control the higher level of our airspace, we have asked NATO to block immediately also the airspace for the Russian jets and Russian commercial airlines. In no moment we have seen any type of divergence from the Kosovar politics with the European Union countries and so on. You're right to say that there are still 5 members of the European Union that do not recognize independence of Kosovo. I wish and I call on political consciousness of those countries to see that actually what is happening in Ukraine, the decision not to recognize Kosovo is unjust, and it leaves European Union and European continent without completing its security umbrella and foreign policy, common foreign policy frame. Kosovo is left together with Bosnia and Herzegovina in a lingering process for the last 25 years because it seems like the understanding of the Serbian intention, it was to buy time. Buying time by showing the good face in Brussels and continuing to play the devils here in the region. And why this has actually been the strategy. The strategy has been for 2 reasons. One, waiting for Russia to get stronger and play a major role in the European Union geopolitical game, which we saw now with Serbia refusing to put the sanctions against Russia. And the second is for the memory of the 90s to fade. Unfortunately, today we can list number of very credible European and the United States politicians and decision makers who are either retired or passed away, like Erhard Busak or Melvin Albright, people who do remember the atrocities that are exactly the same what is happening in Ukraine today that happened in the Balkans, all initiated by Serbia. So with this buying time strategy has created a confusion also with this 5 non-recognizers, which in a way have seen recognition of Kosovo as perhaps an issue that they internally have in their country. But the interest of their country is to have a strong European Union with a common defense and foreign policy. So not recognizing Kosovo, they actually have weakened the European continent and have allowed for the space for Russia through Serbia to challenge the stability, development, and transformation of the Western Balkans to where we all want to be. Now, please allow me to be very frank, because when the bombs are falling in the heads of Ukrainians, we know exactly what that means in the Balkans. We know exactly what that means in Kosovo. Over 1 million people in less than 3 months were expelled from Kosovo from a killing, murdering machinery of Milosevic. So now that's why I think the time for words and perhaps even requirements of the past have to be a lot more flexible. Kosovo needs to move forward. Bosnia-Herzegovina needs to move forward. European Union should see the intention of Russia through Serbia to destabilize the region, keep it uncompleted in order to get access to the Adriatic Sea and the warm waters. This is openly, transparently the intention that has been forever. In the intention of war in Croatia, in the intention of ethnic cleansing and genocide in Bosnia, in the instability and coup d'etat attempt in Montenegro, and then also the war in Kosovo now. So we need to be straightforward. Nobody wants to leave Serbia behind, but Serbia is keeping the entire region behind. So it has to be a clear decision now. It either with the European Union and the democratic values of the region, or it wants to isolate itself in the relationship with Russia. That's why it has become even more problematic for us, this issue of a dialogue. Can we dialogue with a regime that celebrates the war criminals and protects even the graffitis of Ratko Mladic in the urban centers of Serbia? Can we have a successful dialogue with Serbia that does not want to open and reconcile and face its own past? So I think Brussels has to see it clear that no, we cannot be hostage anymore. We cannot be anymore on a collective prison here in Kosovo and not have visa liberalization. Imagine that every single European Union citizen can have a Serbian war criminal as a neighbor, free to travel everywhere, but Kosovars cannot travel freely yet. This is not a system of value that we want to see be implemented in the European continent on the 21st century. I'll stop here, and then perhaps we can also have a reaction and a discussion later.
Thank you, Mr. Abazi. Very hard words. Ms. Kanko, do you have any comment on what we have just heard?
Yes, my party and also our group supports, of course, a visa-free for Kosovo, and we have repeatedly voted for that. Besides, I understand perfectly the point also about the foreign interference, like Russia. We've been worried also about what is happening in Bosnia-Herzegovina as well. Like when we see that Russia, Turkey are trying to interfere in the relationship with the EU by financing proxies in the region and trying to destabilize some Balkan countries to prevent them to become closer to the EU, just to keep them in another influence zone and to manipulate them. But I sense, in my experience as a shadow, but also in the work we are doing in the European Parliament, that the Balkan countries want freedom and want European values, that they know what it is to live without freedom. The speaker recalled the people who had to flee, the killing, etc. So they know why European values are so important. And I would like to add to that in Europe, in the European Union, we tend, certainly in the western part of the European Union, we tend to forget what the value is of living a life in peace without war, thanks to the EU itself. So today, where some of us are just waking up like, oh, war is actually still possible in Europe, we need to stick to that, to remember that having the EU and living in peace is not something we should take for granted, and that we every day need to fight for it and to listen to people who have had the experience of facing the war and who know why to join the EU now. So at the end, I will call the leaders, indeed, if they come and smile in Brussels, they need to make the people smile at home as well by accelerating the process of achieving the necessary reforms to become part of the European Union for those who haven't started yet.
Mr. Ivucic, just a few words.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that we really have to be faster. We really left them too long waiting for something to happen, and we didn't appreciate what the moves they have done. So my colleague Asita mentioned this visa liberalization system. It's urgent what we have to do. I know it's up to Council and Commission to make it faster, but it's really, now even Kosovo have to pay twice more for visas than some countries who are very far away from the European Union. It is not fair. We have to make it better and really give them this perspective. That's a crucial point, because every other change they have to, reforms they have to make in not just in Kosovo but also in North Macedonia, Albania, and all other countries depend on this perspective. If they will feel that they are that we watch them and then we shall reward good reforms they make, then they will make these reforms faster.
Okay, now let me turn to Mr. Gergi Vrmo from Albania. He's program director of the Institute for Mediation and Democracy in Albania. Mr. Vrmo, it's been 13 years since Albania submitted its formal application for the EU membership. Despite the European Commission's repetitive recommendations to open membership negotiations with Albania, it took 4 years to officially start the talks. And this is mainly due to the veto of some of the member states. What is the support for Albania, for the accession of Albania nowadays?
Hello, and thank you for opportunity for inviting me. Well, Albania hasn't opened yet the accession negotiations officially, so the Council has expressed or has confirmed the country's readiness to take this step, but that step hasn't taken place yet. And the reason is the Bulgaria's veto over Macedonia's opening of accession negotiations. So Ms. Kanko earlier said that for a marriage to work, we need also to have this time to get to know each other and to fall in love eventually, and then to basically get married. So I think at this point we are at the still getting to know each other phase with the European Union. Unfortunately, for long we have maybe idealized too much the European Union. So what was the European Union for Albanians in Albania? We overthrown the communist regime in the early 90s precisely with this hope, because we wanted Albania to become just like the rest of Europe. We want Albania like Europe. This was our motto in the 30 years ago when we overthrown the communist regime. So after 30 years now, we come to a point where we realize that Europe is not as perfect as we thought, that Europe has its own flaws, it has its own imperfections, has moments of weaknesses, and so on and so forth. So although EU has confirmed that Albania is ready to open accession talks, this is not happening over a really trivial and reason, and that has nothing to do with the European EU's Copenhagen criteria for membership. Although Kosovo has met all the conditions for the visa liberalization, and this is something that the EU itself confirms, we still see that Kosovo and citizens in Kosovo are the only black hole in the region, are the only citizens of the region and of this continent that cannot travel freely in Europe. So we are now getting to know also this side of the European Union, and maybe that's healthy. Maybe that will lead to a more healthy relationship. Of course, the support for the European Union in Albania still remains high. Compared to the region, I think Kosovo has the highest support for the European Union, but Albania comes second, if I'm not mistaken. This is a mixture of, there's a mixture of reasons for that. On one hand, Albania has always had only plan A. Albania has always looked towards the West, towards Europe, towards the States, towards the club of democracy for its future. Sometimes when you go through such a long transition period, like 3 decades, sometimes you see Europe also as a and I know this is wrong, but this is the perception of deluded people. Sometimes we see it as a solution to our problems, but slowly we are getting to know the fact that the solution to our internal struggle will still be our own efforts and our own reforms. So Europe, Brussels will not solve our problems just like that by becoming members of the European Union. Just as we're seeing significant problems, some new EU member states are still facing today. And I fully support Ms. Kanko's point on the things that Europe is taking for granted. And this is probably the biggest lesson Western Balkan can offer to Europe. Western Balkan is a pure reminder of the things EU is taking for granted, like peace, democracy, economic prosperity, diversity, multiculturalism, religious tolerance, and religious cohabitation, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll stop here because I think I took too much time.
Thank you, Mr. Vermo. I didn't want to interrupt you, but if you allow me to clarify, because you mentioned Bulgaria and Bulgarians' veto, but Bulgarians' position is that the two countries, the newest one, the two countries, Albania and North Macedonia, they differs, and Albania is ready to start negotiations. This is not the case with the North Macedonia. And you didn't mention this position of Bulgaria, and also when we talk about the veto, you didn't mention France as well. In 2019, France was the country to make the veto, right?
Well, no, not only France. It was also Netherlands. I mean, Albania has, let's say, a history with this European skepticism when it comes to our bid for EU membership. Yes, you are right. The Bulgarian government has confirmed that as far as Albania is concerned, of course, Albania is ready to open the accession talks. But on the other hand, there is also this position from the majority of the European Union member states that they don't want the two countries to decouple, which in my personal opinion, this is a completely obsolete debate, because as we are seeing veto after veto, the process is such that even if Albania starts or any other country starts negotiations today, there is nothing and there is no one that can convince us that tomorrow maybe a new Bulgaria or some other member states does not come up with a new idea that, you know, I want to veto, I don't know, Albania because it's not enough European, or on completely irrelevant grounds, on like it is being happening between Bulgaria and North Macedonia on historical reasons. I mean, history is not part of the Copenhagen criteria,
But
and neither are other.
But the human rights are part of the Copenhagen criteria, right? The human rights.
I'm sorry. Will you I mean, you are the moderator. You will have to allow me to
Please go ahead.
answer, and then you can pose question. So these are not part of the Copenhagen criteria, and these certainly should not stand in the way of such an important process of that is EU enlargement. So if we all agree that enlargement is and should be strategic, important for the European Union, not least because of what's happening today with the Russian aggression in Ukraine, with other Eastern influences trying to build fortresses in the region and jeopardizing EU's existence from here and from within, because there is also Russian influence in member states, right? So I don't think that we are getting anywhere, and I don't think that that's a good thing for the European Union itself. I mean, let's imagine if France would say Belgium, since it is using, I don't know, French and Dutch language shouldn't exist, so let's scrap it. I mean, we should be careful with certain processes, and we should be more open to stick to values, a Europe of values, of human rights, of protection of minorities, so there is a clear framework for these issues. So we should not mix processes that do not really belong there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Verma. I just wanted to add, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm here to put the questions, and I just wanted to add that the human rights are one of the Copenhagen criteria in the political field, and this is the problem North Macedonia has with Bulgaria. Bulgaria maintains that North Macedonia doesn't respect the human rights, especially concerning Bulgarians in this country. And Bulgaria has given many examples. It has sent many diplomatic notes to Skopje in this regard. This is a very, very important clarification when we talk about accession. Anyway, let's proceed with our discussion. Question to all of you, all of the participants. There is an ongoing debate in the European Union about the future. This debate also calls for institutional changes in the European Union. What should be the future of the European Union from your perspective? Where do you see the opportunities, and what are the biggest challenges for it? Ms. Kanko, back to you.
Well, I think that the future of Europe should be in our daily work in the European Parliament, what we are doing. And so, in fact, one brought a new construction of an activity that should address the future of Europe. So it was not really our first choice to be having an extra construction on that, because we think that we all have to work for that future. For me, there are three main challenges for the future of Europe. First of all, and we have been saying that so many times here, but the left did not listen and the Greens did not listen, and they've made us more and more depending on energy from countries that are not really our friends. So I think one of the biggest threats to the future of Europe is its energy dependency to Russia, for example. So when we build energy independence, that's going to consolidate our freedom, and we need to make sure that we can provide for ourselves. That's an important strategic decision that we don't need an extra construction to achieve, but that we need to use our daily work here to achieve. A second threat is the incapacity of the EU to actually have a correct and workable migration policy. We always had this issue. People are still dying in the sea. There are so many debates. One, I am not a woman that can be very frustrated. I have worked a lot in business, sat on boards, have dealt with all kinds of difficult people. So, but I am very, very frustrated by the way in which the debates about migration are evolving in the European Parliament, because it's just a debate. and people don't never find solutions. So at the end, the problem still exists, and and that is the issue that is threatening also the future of the EU, because member states are really not getting along about this point. So this should be addressed. And a third point that I would like to add on this is also the Africa policy. That's just like there is a concentration to have in the Western Balkans, and I think we should have it. We also need to have a different approach to our relationship with to our EU-Africa relationships. When we see that people still act with Africa like we are in the 70s, I really don't understand. Then I think that the future of Europe looks more and more like what should be its past. And we need to focus on a real future where we look at Africa as a strategic place, where in Africa, Russia is also active now in Africa. So we need to be very careful, because these African countries also have power to vote, for example, and we need to make sure that we trade with them, that we find a way, a balance in our relationships with them, and not think that we are like the center of the world and we don't need anything from other countries. We need to have this, stop with this arrogance and really have a relationship with other countries. These are three main points that I usually think are the difficult points for the future of Africa. Looking now at the conference that is now ongoing about the future of Europe, I would say, look, in my opinion, we actually didn't change our mind about the fact that the task of a politician is to make laws and to speak with the citizen. So with or without this conference, I am going to speak with citizens, because that's my job.
Mr. Ilčić?
Yes, the European Union has problems. People really said it truly. And for example, Croatia in last 10 years, since last our census and then another one in 2021, has lost 10% of our citizens. So we are 400,000 less than we were in 2011. And most of them went to Germany, went to Ireland, went to Belgium, to different countries. And it is not, so it is very bad for Croatia. And it is, I would also say, not fair, you know, for us to, for example, to educate one medical doctor, we need approximately 100,000 euro. And then Croatia gives this money to educate this person, and then this person goes to Germany. So it's not fair. And that's why we have to fight, but inside the European Union, for this cohesion policy, because, of course, that is, if you want to have freedom, and this freedom of moving people all around European Union, then you have to consider that this standard will influence on this freedom, so that people will go to the countries with better standard, with higher salaries, and then you will lose people. And then, for example, Albania and Kosovo have, so I will say openly, very good situation, because they have very young inhabitants and a lot of people, and they will survive this. What maybe North Macedonia will have more problems with this, or any other countries. Then we have a big problem in the European Union with not just a relation to Poland and Hungary. So we have ideological approach. And actually, maybe that's the biggest problem in European Union. Then the parties from the left wing of the political spectrum want to impose their worldview to all others. And you know, European community was established in the very, very difficult years after Second World War, when differences among states were much bigger than today. But I will say Christian politicians, Adenauer, Schuman, De Gasperi, you know, were stronger than these differences. They really gave freedom to each country to decide about their worldviews and things like this. And in these days, politicians from left wing want to impose their own worldview to all countries. And that's the problem, because then they want to centralize the power, because they think they have the right, and they have to decide everything here in Brussels, and they don't respect subsidiarity on other countries to be different, to have different worldviews. And that's the problem. And it's the problem in the strength of European Union. For example, my colleague mentioned mentioned Africa. Now we negotiate a new ACP agreement, so African, Caribbean, Pacific, together with European Union. 20 years ago, or now there's 22 years ago, in 2000 exactly, we made one agreement. It was really economic agreement and trade agreement. And now a new proposal is fulfilled with homosexual marriages, sexual education, abortion, and things like this. Now we from European Union, not we, but the left-wing parties want to impose this worldview to these countries, and especially when it comes to some Muslim countries in Africa, which are not very in favor of, for example, homosexual marriage, then they will turn to Russia and they will turn to China. China is more and more has more and more strong influence in these countries all around the world, because they are not burdened with imposing some worldviews. So when it comes to human rights, when you mention and rightly mention, we have to really keep to really human rights and not some new interpretation of human rights which leftists wants to impose. That is very important because European Union can survive just on democracy. And democracy is not when you centralize the power in Brussels and then people in Croatia don't even think that they can influence on Brussels. Because democracy means that people believe that they can impact, that they can influence on something. Then they will be engaged. If they don't feel this, that they can influence, then they will be separated from the state. We shall have centralized power in Brussels, and democracy will die at the end, and that's the problem.
Before going to our remote speakers, Ms. Kanko, you wanted to add something before leaving?
Yes, I would like to thank our colleague, Professor Krasnodębski, for organizing this, and also everyone to join this panel. I have two comments I would like to make before I leave. First of all, in the EU-Africa relation, what I want to see as a change is to move from the aid idea to economic relationship, and also, of course, enhance human rights, like women's rights, for example. I was born and I grew up in Africa, and we might disagree on it, but I support the right to abortion, and I support also the right of everyone to love who they want. So I support that, and I think when we have a relation, when we give money to a country or whatever, we need to put conditions in it. But the EU needs to change one thing, and I would be happy. That one thing is the whole thing of aid. I don't believe in aid. I think if aid was working, of course, today it would no longer be necessary. If it is not working, we see that if you do that, you only finance corruption, you don't know where the money is going into, and it is against fundamental values of Europe. If the Western Balkan countries need to make reforms to fight corruption to join the European Union, why is the European Union financing corruption in African countries? Why are they not implementing the same values that they expect from other countries in those countries? So I think we need to
What is the answer? We put the questions, but
the question
what is
your
answer?
I think the answer is just laziness. I think diplomatic laziness and diplomatic babysitting, that is one side, and also too much of the left-wing policy that actually when they see an African, they just want to help you. I'm sorry, I don't need any help from the left. You know, we are capable, we have a brain, we can work hard. And as an African and as a European, I would like to say that this is a global form of racism, to see Africa as a place only that needs help. Africa has full of potential, smart, brilliant people, and a lot of ideas and things to share with the rest of the world. If we don't manage that, what is going to happen is that these countries are going to turn to Russia, turn to China, and are going to vote against us in the UN, and are going to turn totally against us. But when the dictators are rich enough, because of the money that the EU is giving without control, and because of the money that China is giving to buy them, what they will do is to persecute the people there, the citizens, and they will run away to come to Europe. And then we'll have this migration issue again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kanko. Now let's go to our remote speakers for their final remarks. Dr. Panchev.
Briefly, in the political sphere of the EU, the ideology and policy of imposing the doctrines of neoliberalism At its age, some theories, gender ideology, radical feminism, etc., are dominating. When certain countries from Eastern Europe, like Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, try to oppose these policies and attempts to take measures in conservative direction, their attempts are judged as populistic, and the leaders of the responsible conservative movements are accused of acting as anti-democratic. Therefore, the European integration process is acknowledged only in terms of the neoliberal project. Because of this tendency in the EU, there is a strong reluctance of countries like Bulgaria to deepen their integration to the EU. I think that it's not acceptable. The European Union, the institutions in Brussels, they have to resolve this problem and to allow to the other countries to protect their own values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Panchev. Now let me go to Mr. Abazi for his final remarks. Mr. Abazi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Very interesting and rich debate there. I have eventually 4 points on my conclusions and answering to your question about the future of European Union. Nothing, absolutely nothing will be the same after the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. And I think this is a moment to review the position, the common foreign security and defense policy. I wish there will be no casualties, but we see human suffering and the refugees moving from their homes and countries. So EU is not immune anymore from wars and conflicts. It's happening at the border, in the border, and it's impacting its members. Therefore, lessons learned from the Balkans seems to have not been enough. Now we, as a continent, we need to lead on denuclearization of the world. The EU's leadership on removing the nuclear weapons all around the globe should be there. This leadership should be both firm and fast, because the humankind is in danger of the possession of the nuclear weapons. And therefore, having the dictatorships and having autocratic leaderships allowed in and around and trading with them for years and decades actually proved to be allowing for the bomb to be built. And now we are in the situation where we are. Although we praise the unity of the European Union by putting the sanctions, I personally believe that those sanctions should have been done when Russia entered Crimea 10 years ago, not now, because it is too late, and now we're dealing with a done act where our hands are tied and we're not being able anymore to find solutions to stop Putin and stop Russian aggression. The second is the green agenda and the climate change. I think the European Union institutions should put really in front the climate change and the green agenda and move with it, not only to save the only planet we have, but also to take the responsibility of the development of industrial phase to the situation where the globe is. Obviously, the United States and European countries should be leading in transforming the energy sector and becoming self-reliable on the green energy development, on the transformation of transportation systems in order to bring the CO2 and the green gas emissions to zero. It is the EU's responsibility to take leadership on that and perhaps use it as an opportunity for a neutral platform in dealing with the conflicts. I fully agree about the aid and the aid effectiveness. We need to go back to development and support countries to remove corrupted, criminalized power structures in their countries in order to allow for democracy to be indigenously uprooted, to be functional in their countries, so consequences of migration and movements and potential conflicts are smaller. So aid is not the answer. The aid could be the answer for a short time. Development and proper democracy building based on the initiatives of those countries. And the last, if I am allowed, is to prevent the type of Brexits. I think the EU should be constantly reintroducing itself, the EU institutions, to the citizens, to the local communities, to the municipalities, to the national states. EU should be that harmonizing of part of the diversity that exists in the European continent. And that can happen only if we bring EU institution and its impact closer to the citizen, where they feel comfortable of having their own identity and also feeling great about being Europeans. That's my last point on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abazi. We are going to our next speaker on the video connection. Mr. Vermo, you have the floor for your final remarks. Can you, in short, tell us what could the Western Balkan countries bring to the EU?
Thank you. That's a very important question, actually, that we've been trying to start a debate even internally, because European integration should also be about what we can generate as added value and what we can bring as novelty and as new values in the European Union. Every EU enlargement has brought an expansion of EU in different policies. But I think in the case of Western Balkans, I mentioned a bit earlier that the region can serve as a reminder for the European Union of the things that it's been taking for granted. And in this sense, the region can, what the region can bring is, I can speak, for instance, for Albania. One of the core values of our society is that of the religious coexistence and cohabitation. But the region as a whole can also bring other values related to multiculturalism, diversity, coexistence in multi-ethnic societies, as well as the importance that we, people in the Western Balkans, attach to peace. We have very recently, not so long ago, experienced the consequences of war, what the whole Europe, including us, is watching from TVs. Many countries in this region know exactly what it feels. And sometimes reinforcing that message, bringing that as a stronger reminder to the European Union once we are hopefully member of the Union, can be an important added value. In the context of what the future of Europe should be, many of the speakers in this panel underline very important messages, and I can only echo and support their messages. But I think I just want to add, if I'm allowed, just 3 brief points which I think are important for Europe to address for its own future. First, I think the internal challenges of EU's governance and decision making. The EU is experiencing significant challenges in this context. Many of the misunderstandings internally and of the impasse of EU's progress in certain areas stem from there. Secondly, I think this is very important, the positioning towards the system of values of the European Union while building relationships in the foreign policy area, as well as while doing business. So if there is anything that we've learned from Russian aggression, is that there is no such thing as we're not mixing anything else with doing business. We're just doing business. No. While we do business and while we build relationships with different countries, we need also to emphasize the importance of rule of law, the importance of democracy, the importance of democratic values for ourselves and our partners to respect. Finally, and I think this is very important, fighting populism and political extremism within the European Union. These have unfortunately been a main source for anti-immigrant feelings, for Islamophobia, for all kinds of extremist and very dangerous political behaviors that are transferred later on among the people, among ordinary people and masses, and make our lives very difficult.
Thank you very much. Many thanks to all of you in the studio and in the video connections. We're coming back in just a few minutes. The closing discussion will be starting immediately after the commercials. Stay with us.
There's a new hope for Europe. A Europe of jobs, prosperity, and recovery. A Europe that safeguards its citizens and borders. There's a Europe that respects its national democracies, that protects the environment and nurtures its rural economies. There's a Europe that does less and does it better, that cuts bureaucracy and adds value for you. There's a Europe that looks inwards and outwards, for trade, for security, and for friendship. It's time to get Europe under control and back on track. It's time for a new hope for Europe. It's time to reset EU.
Now we are going to our closing panel with the participation of three ECR MEPs, Professor Richard Legutku, co-chairman of the ECR Group, as well as Professor Krasnodiebski and Mr. Jambaski. We have with us as well Ms. Jasna Jelisic, head of Western Balkans Task Force, European External Action Service. Stay with us, we are coming in just a few seconds. Let me introduce now our guest speaker in this closing session, Ms. Jasna Jelisic, head of Western Balkans Task Force, European External Action Service. Mr. Jelisic, as far as I understood, you are leading the Western Balkans StartCom Task Force, established in 2018. To step up the EU's communication efforts to the region, to help explain the EU policy in the region, and to close communication gaps. You also deal with disinformation. And yesterday we discussed the foreign influence and disinformation in the Western Balkan countries. What is the effect of the war in Ukraine in this regard?
The effect of what is currently happening in Ukraine is felt in the Western Balkans in the similar way as in the rest of the world. People have a hard time understanding what is really happening, also thanks to disinformation and information manipulation that is happening globally. And we, as the EAS Stratcom, are observing that situation, first of all, and trying to understand and analyze what is happening and why is that happening and why it is successful in some parts of the world and with some communities, because that's the first step of first understanding before you come up with a good strategy how to tackle it.
So what is the answer? Why is it successful in some countries?
Well, I don't want to go into too many of scientific, there is a complex interplay of issues, but one of them is that we all need to be aware that our brain, it's a science, our brain have a filter, and the information that does not fit our previous beliefs is rejected. So for some communities, either who have already been antagonized against the West or the values or the EU or have certain grievances, are easily kind of rejecting information that is coming from the sources perceived like that. So what we as the EU do, and the EAS in particular being engaged in this field at the request of the member states, is trying to provide fact-based information. And of course, with people who are open to receive these informations, it works very well, and also across the Western Balkans. While in some communities, they're open to different messages because they have already been engaged or exposed to information manipulation sometimes for a decade or even longer. And different communities and those who manipulate information environment tap into specific grievances. These grievances would be different in the north of Kosovo from those in the south of Kosovo. They're sometimes different in different parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, or in Serbia is different than in Albania. And those who tend to manipulate information environment know that, and this is how they place. This is why we try to engage and actually empower people on the ground to be able to think for themselves. This is why sorting out the problem of disinformation is not just shouting louder whatever the EU or any other actor has to say, but really empower the local communities, because when we talk about the Western Balkans, we are talking about the EU, future EU member states. And the same measures that we have for the EU member states at the moment, helping with a set of measures to build the resilience of the local population to disinformation, we are doing the same for the Western Balkans.
Which country suffers from the biggest influence and disinformation campaigns if we talk about the war in Ukraine? Which of those 6 countries?
I mean, when we talk about communities rather than countries, because people or different ethnicities in the Western Balkans...
which community suffers more?
They do not always live within one country. So this is one of the complexities of the Western Balkans, which is also the richness of the Western Balkans. But we would say that when you analyze the information environment in where, for example, pro-Kremlin narratives have a stronger resonance, is, for example, with the Serbian-speaking communities. And there are many, many reasons for that. There are traditional ties, cultural ties, religious ties. But this is also what people have been hearing, and where the information environment is open for these messages, because as everywhere in the world, anybody from abroad who is willing to project a certain view cannot go far without the local enablers. And this is general. This is also for our EU member states. This is for other parts of the world. And it plays pretty much in the Western Balkans as well. But I really want to say that Western Balkans is very often treated as an odd number. But when we observe and analyze the situation globally, which we do, we see that the interplay is the same. The methodology is the same. The only difference is that those who manipulate information environment really look to exploit the local grievances. And there are some specificities in the Western Balkans when it comes to that.
How this affects the stability and the security of the region?
Again, the same as the rest of the world. Disinformation and information manipulation tends to divide societies, polarize them, push them to the extreme, and in that way making the countries unstable. And the same interplays in the Western Balkans, that the disinformation tries to achieve the same, to push those that are sitting somewhere in the political spectrum, knowing the psychometrics that technology now allows, the digital footprint of every user of the social media allows these people now to trace where people are on the scale and then try to push them to the extreme. And this is a phenomenon that is global, and it's also not specific to the Western Balkans. It's having the same effect or threatens to have. This is why the solution has to be the same as we have for the EU. It is being able to build the resilience of the people and develop some sort of a psychological defense to these operations.
Out of the the war in Ukraine, are there disinformation campaigns in one of these 6 Western Balkan countries that affect the others, or just one of the others?
I am not really sure the nuance of the question. Could you clarify?
Are there disinformation campaigns in one of those 6 countries that are focused mainly to go abroad and affect the other Western Balkan country?
I mean, the Western Balkans, there are basically 2 major linguistic areas. So those who speak or understand Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, Montenegrin, and Macedonian as well, and there are those. These are the languages that are understood among each other without translation and subtitles. And there is Albanian kind of language-speaking community. So when disinformation is produced, it flies within these linguistic communities, and borders mean very little. And also, traditionally, that region consumes the same cultural products. You know, people read the same books, wherever, if they're published in Croatia, they're going to be read in other parts and by other communities that understand that language. Or the same goes with films, the same goes with music, the same goes with the media consumption. So what is communicated in one country, and for example, also in Sputnik Serbia that exists in Serbia, when they produce this content and push these narratives, due to this linguistic proximity, that these narratives flow into these linguistic areas.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Jelicic, we are focused on the future of Europe in our debate. According to you, what is the future of the Western Balkan countries? Will they succeed to fulfill all the criteria and access the European Union in next 10 years?
Mm. For the EU, there is no doubt that future of the Western Balkans is in the EU. That is good for the EU, that is good for the Western Balkans. There is a mutual benefit in all of this. And of course, the countries need to fulfill the criteria. It is difficult to put in how many years that is going to happen. This solely depends on the tempo of the reforms. In the previous rounds of enlargement, some countries managed to do the homework in 3 years. Some countries, it took them 12 years, and anything in between. So the tempo is really determined, and I am somebody who has been involved in this for many, many years. And I have seen that the tempo of enlargement really depends on the willingness of the elected authorities to approach these transformations. And when it comes to the Western Balkans people, this is what really matters for them. It is not about, joining the EU tomorrow. It is this process of accession in which they gain the biggest benefits in terms of functioning institutions, functioning courts, effective mechanisms for fighting corruption, good educational system, good health system, accountability, media freedom, possibility for the functioning of the thriving democratic society. And at the end of that process, it's the membership. So the sooner these things are completed, the better. One thing for sure, people of the Western Balkans want it, and this is why the EU is there to help and support that process. Because when you look for in any opinion poll in the Western Balkans, what I just mentioned, this is precisely what the people in the Western Balkans want. They want these functioning courts, they want merit-based employment, they want democracy. And if they cannot have it at home, they decide to move into the EU. They don't move anywhere else. And this is why it is so important to build the EU there and keep that talent there. And this is precisely how they contributed over the last year and this year, especially on the civil society side, to the Conference on the Future of Europe, basically saying this is what we can do for the EU for the first time, and we can be a part of a solution, not a part of the problem, as it's usually portrayed.
Thank you, Ms. Jelisic, for sharing your views with us. Now let me turn to Professor Legutku, co-chairman of the ECR Group in the European Parliament. Professor Legutku, would you summarize the ECR's vision for a broader Europe, Europe that means much more than merely the European Union than it is now?
Yes, indeed. Our view, the ECR view of the European Union is different from the views of other political groups. For us, the EU is not and should not be a bureaucratic structure controlled solely by the West European political elites. This view of Europe currently enforced by the European institutions and some governments has outlived its time, I think, and has turned out self-defeating. For the ECR, the EU should rather illustrate Europe as a great, large cultural entity extending far beyond the current EU borders and encompassing far more social and cultural areas than is currently accepted. Russia's recent invasion of Ukraine showed where the border between Europe and non-Europe lies. Ukraine certainly deserves to have a place among the European community of nations. And it is not only for the reason of security. We believe that Ukraine as a nation might contribute a lot to the European pool. Eastern Europe, including Georgia and Ukraine, but also the Balkan countries, should play its proper role in European politics. And for a long time, the ECR has been advocating the enlargement of the EU to include those countries. It is politically unreasonable to leave them outside the European structures, exposed to Russian influence. It is also unreasonable from the perspective of Europe as a cultural entity. These countries are part of European civilization, and the EU without them is culturally diminished. Besides, as I said at the beginning, the EU political elites need some fresh impulses and fresh inspirations. The recent developments showed that they lost their leadership qualities. And those fresh impulses and inspirations are likely to come from Eastern Europe.
Professor Legutku, what are the ECR's priorities when we talk about the negotiation processes and EU accession of those countries?
Well, contrary or in contrast with other political groups whose attitude to the enlargement is rather lukewarm, highly skeptical, we are and have been for quite some time, have been in favor of having Balkan countries joining the EU. So that's our political priority. I mean, for the sake of political balance and equilibrium in Europe, we need those countries as we need Ukraine and Georgia. But also in the framework of security, those countries have to become a part of European security. I mean, the recent war in Ukraine, invasion of Ukraine by the Russian army, has proved what happens if these countries are not part of the European system of security.
Thank you very much, Professor Legutko. Please stay with us. We're coming back in a minute.
Sin fe, no habría Europa.
La liberté est le fondement de l'Europe.
Respekt für das gemeinsame Erbe.
Tradition binds our continent.
Non c'è valore più importante della famiglia.
Europa jest dobrem wspólnym. Różnimy się, ale powinno nas łączyć wspólne dziedzictwo. Powróćmy do Unii Europejskiej, która z tego dziedzictwa wyrasta i która szanuje narodowe tożsamości. Only the European Union without arrogance, based on solidarity and mutual respect for its member states, can regain the support of the European nations. We can do it together.
Welcome back. We are now in our final part of this event, and we have with us the two co-organizers of this insightful event, Professor Krasnodiemski and Mr. Jambaski. Welcome again in the studio. Professor Krasnodiemski, in your view, what is the Western Balkan countries' perspective when we talk about EU integration? Did they comply with all the commitments, and how can they contribute to the European Union?
We had, I think, many interesting ideas and thought about this, what you ask now. And I think that so one problem we have in Europe, that European project, the Union project, became more and more ideological. What we need is more pragmatic and realistic approach, and also what we always stress as a mutual respect also understanding that we are sharing some common values and common principles, but these common principles, common values are articulated in the different national and historical contexts. And I think it was really articulated in this discussion. Now we have a war in Europe, and is something something it was not expected. Actually, I would say realistically we could expect that would come to such a aggression, and this is a new challenge for us. We have to reconsider our project, and we have to open up for all the countries who would like to join the EU, because it's also a choice of civilization, as we stressed, and it is also in order to keep our style of life and also our security.
Thank you very much, Professor Krasnodebski. Thank you for your contribution to these events of the ECR European Neighborhood Institute. Mr. Dzhambazki, how will the ECR group make sure that its vision on the future of Europe and Western Balkans will be attractive for these 6 Western Balkan countries?
Well, first of all, it is realistic. In ECR, we have this a line of behavior. We always try to explain our views. They're realistic, they're from life. They're not based on a fake far-left, far-liberal propaganda. They're not based on some kind of semi-ideological, semi-religion behavior and approach, which is our opponents' one. Parallel with our conference, there is a conference, a Future of Europe, you know. And this conference is something far, far, far away from whatever you can imagine. It is organized as it was before the 1819 in communist countries. There are structured groups of people who are welcoming the decisions and the solutions. There are young consumers there to applaud and to say, bravo, this is not enough. We want more and more integration, more Europe. And when we ask them, there is a problem here, they say, no, we need more Europe. We want, again, more and more power to be taken from the national countries and to move to the Brussels. And when there are problems and needs for some solutions, and Brussels usually says, okay, this is a problem. We need to form a committee and to make a deep research. And then we will check the results, and then we will make another committee. So in these 6 Western Balkans countries, their societies, part of them were part of communism, and they were under communist dictatorship. So our communities are much more immunized. We have immune system, and we can recognize right now this post-communist new Bolshevik slang of Brussels. So that is maybe the main goal of ECR efforts, just to explain the need not to go in this self-destructive, self-suicidal way of making Europe some kind of super federalistic state. We need to explain, and we need to reach these people and to tell them that future of Europe is in one Europe, based on national states, national sovereignty, national and traditional values, family values, and countries who will work together and not under the umbrella of Brussels bubble.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dzhambazki. Thank you, Professor. Many thanks to all the speakers in this conference. And thank you for being with us. This was the final panel of the ECR Western Balkans Summit, a hybrid conference bringing together recognized experts in the field of European integration, as well as current and former decision makers from the Western Balkans and MEPs from the ECR Group. We finish our event today, but this is not the end of ECR, the Europe's Future campaign. So stay tuned, and for more information, check the website ecrthefuture.eu. Thank you for being with us.
The ECR Group is the voice of Eurorealism, the sensible middle way between ever more Europe and no Europe, with respect for the sovereignty of Europe's national democracies, with less bureaucracy, more fiscal responsibility, and equality for all member states. We believe the peoples of Europe want the European Union to do less and to do it better.